Jacob Aremark has been a martial arts enthusiast since 6 years old. He's been practicing Aikido since the late 90s and co-runs a dojo in Denmark, in a city whose name sadly I can't pronounce, spelled Aarhus. Jakob helps organize an annual summer camp that draws participants from all over the world. I'll put a link to his dojo, another pronunciation I'd badly butcher, in my Substack, so please check that out at keytothecity.substack.com. Jakob's a body therapist and yoga teacher with a master's degree in philosophy, and he's currently studying carpentry with the designs to build a dojo. It took us a few minutes to get onto the topic of ki, which was the original intention. Seems like we had to first lay down some foundations discussing the differences and similarities between Eastern and Western philosophy. Once we got started, we hit on many topics, all my favorites: mind-body connection, dualism, the Cartesian paradigm, the possibility of localized incorporeal being, and much, much more. Thanks for listening to Key to the City. Enjoy this episode.
Well, I'm a yoga teacher and a philosopher. I'm a philosopher. Everybody's a philosopher. I have a university paper that says I'm a philosopher, and I spent almost as long time as people spend to become a doctor to become a philosopher. And
Can I ask if there was a study in philosophy? Because I know there's different branches of philosophical study.
yeah, what I studied particularly, you mean? Yeah, so I think mostly if you study philosophy at a Western European university, it goes without saying that it's Western philosophy that you study, and I did too. And when I came to a time when I had to write my thesis, the place I was studying, they were very much into the philosophy of language, which basically says, like in broad strokes, that if you can talk about it in clear terms, is it interesting? And what you cannot talk about is sort of uninteresting. And so this is what I was doing in the daytime. And then in the nighttime, of course, I was practicing Aikido, where we experience a lot of things that we can't really talk about, but still we manage to sort of convey a meaning and stuff like that. So when I had to write my thesis, I decided to write my thesis about body awareness, and sort of try to explore the limits of, okay, if you cannot talk about it, like you cannot really talk about the taste of a strawberry, or you can, but it's good if you have had a strawberry as well. So I was kind of trying to push philosophy to its limits concerning body experience. Like, what can we talk about? What can we not talk about? And if we cannot talk about it, can we then communicate it in some other way? And that basically ended up also being my work life. Like, I've been working in this kind of schizophrenic area of philosophy on the one hand, and then all these body practices like martial arts and yoga and stuff on the other hand, and trying to talk to people about these things, how they can be helpful in your life, and also, of course, teaching people different practices. Like, how can you use the realization that you have a body, even if you work with something where you don't particularly notice that you have a body. I mean, even talking to you, even though you're in a different country and I can only see you on a screen, my body is still somehow involved. I'm breathing, I have a pulse, and maybe that can be useful for me somehow.
Well, so without going off on a whole separate tangent, I just wanted to bring up a point that I thought was interesting, because you're talking about like almost as if there's a dichotomy between philosophy and body awareness.
Well,
right? And I feel like that's kind of a more modern aspect of philosophy, right? Because on my last episode, I talked to Dr. Greg Shaw, and there was, I don't want to say there was a time where, but at certain times there have been philosophers that still called themselves philosophers that were not objecting to discursive thought, like non-discursive thought, in terms of like body awareness can coexist within philosophy. But I feel like now, like modern philosophy I shouldn't speak about modern philosophy. I'm not a scholar, but
Mm.
I feel like from what you just said,
Hmm.
you sense there was a little bit of a dichotomy between what you were experiencing at the dojo and what you were studying in Western
At
philosophy.
university. Yeah.
Am I reading too much into that,
No, no,
or
this is completely true, and I think the big schism came. I mean, most people have heard about René Descartes, who said, "I
yeah,
think, therefore I am," in
right?
around 1550. And I think what he really did, I mean, the good thing he did was he separated reason from religion in a way, so we could start studying the body, and we didn't have all these Christian dogmas. But the bad thing he did was also he separated the mind from the body in a way, and that's also what we have been basing a lot of our modern like educational system on. Like in Denmark, at least, even people who work very practical, like nurses and stuff, they have to have a lot of theoretical education because we really value the mind, and we don't value the body so much in the educational system, and especially in the philosophy department. I mean, I wrote my thesis on body awareness, and all I did was sit and touch my computer for a whole year, right? So I really basically wrote it without moving, and the guy who read it, he also read it without moving, and then we agreed, yeah, you really know a lot about body awareness. So, but there are modern philosophers, luckily, and especially some people in Denmark actually, who are trying really to reintegrate the body into philosophy. But I think it is something that has been happening in the last, like since Descartes, or you can even go back to Plato and Aristotle and say, whereas Plato was more the theoretical guy, Aristotle was more a practical guy. So it's a schism that you can see a long way back. But especially since Descartes and the development of modern science, the body has become an objective, like a brick or something else, to be studied by medicine. And the body, I think, as we are interested in it, experienced from the inside, like through the practice of, for example, Aikido, is really something that has been frowned upon, like something not scientific or something you can't really approach it in any sort of systematic way, is what the scientists have been saying. If you have something with your body, go to a doctor. He knows much more about your body than you do, which of course in a way is true. He knows about internal organs and stuff, but I'm the only one who can have the experience of my body. so so yeah, in a way I did feel that the academic world of philosophy was very much people with very big heads and very small bodies just sitting around, talking about
Well,
things like body awareness.
one of the ways I try to describe Aikido to people in my life that don't practice, and they ask me what it does, why I do it.
Hmm.
One of the simplest ways I describe it is it's an exercise that strengthens my mind body connection.
Mm.
Like either like it puts my mind in my body more, like that's what I get from the everyday practice of it. Of
Yeah,
course there's millions of other facets of it, but
yeah,
the
yeah,
mind body connection is one of the ones I always go back to when I'm trying to even like justify or rationalize to myself why I spend so much of my time practicing and thinking
yeah,
about it. And at the end of the day,
yeah,
it could just be as simple as because it strengthens that connection.
yeah. I mean, the Aikido that I come from is Ki Aikido, and the proper name for Ki Aikido is Shinshin Toitsu Aikido, which is like Aikido for the unification of mind and body. So in a way, you could say that Toi Sensei sort of already had this idea back in the days when he sort of made his style of Aikido, that it's really for the unification of mind and body, which of course you could say presupposes an initial separation of mind and body. So you are actually still caught up in the Cartesian dualism in a way. But of course, most people are. So maybe you need to say, even if you don't quite believe that there are two entities, it can still make sense to say it unifies the relationship because people know. I mean, people know what you mean, even though maybe metaphysically we are all actually just one thing. If we could get rid of the card somehow.
Right. Well, and even if personally and individually we can recognize that there really is no distinction between mind and body, the
Mm.
activities that we're subjected to by our cultures and civilization, they they separate, like our minds and bodies are separated even if we don't feel that they are
Yeah,
they are
yeah, yeah,
through our society, like
yeah,
just
yeah.
our life.
Yeah, of course. And if you want to talk, I mean, you have to use the language that is in use. I mean, if I want to talk to you, I have to speak in English. And if you want to talk to most people, you have to speak in the language of dualism, because that's how the world works. Even if I like to speak German, it wouldn't really work in this context because we speak like we speak. But this is maybe why, and that's maybe getting to the central topic of our conversation. This is maybe why I think the concept of ki is actually interesting, because maybe ki, speaking about ki, at least I feel for me, is one of the ways that I can go beyond this dualism of mind and body, which permeates conversation normally. I really feel that when we're working with ki in the dojo, I get to speak in ways that I don't get to speak in a lot of the time, especially if it's a student of longer time, because then we have developed this little niche of language where we can go beyond this mind body dualism, and we can talk about ki instead. So maybe this was the whole introduction to get to, at least from my point of view, why is it even interesting to have a conversation about ki?
Yeah, so the conversation could go in many directions. I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in non-duality too
Mm-hmm.
because I'm I hear the term a lot, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I necessarily understand what the duality is. Like, is the duality between matter and spirit, or between mind and body, or between self and other? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there could be a lot of different dualities. So,
Mm-hmm.
is there no duality at all in existence, or is the duality only an illusion? And then we can get into ki after we kind of,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously ki is the main reason why we're having this discussion. But I want
Yeah.
to kind of I just want to get into non-duality for a couple minutes because I just read this really interesting book that I found online, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
master's thesis someone wrote on the religious practices of O Sensei that contributed to Aikido, and
Mm-hmm.
the word non-duality is mentioned many times, and
Yeah.
I want to get like you know a few more
Mm-hmm.
definitions of non-duality in my mind before I really
Mm-hmm.
let it.
Yeah. So what I think, at least, because like I mentioned in the beginning, one of my other sort of perspectives is the yoga perspective. So when I think about the term non-duality, I think about the Indian philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. So the knowledge of not two, you could say. Uh, so of course people can use the word non-duality however they like to, and we can't know what they think. But I think the most common way in this spiritual world is with this reference to Advaita Vedanta. And I think in Advaita Vedanta, the idea of the non-dual is the separation of self and other. And I think that's something other than what Descartes was talking about, because of course he didn't know about Advaita Vedanta. He was sitting somewhere in Holland doing mathematics or whatever. So the Cartesian dualism is between the mind and the body, but the Advaita Vedanta Indian dualism is between the self and the non-self, or the me and the other. Um, yeah. And is it real or is it not real? Um, for that, I'd like to introduce a whole different terminology, namely something from Buddhism, because in Buddhism they talk about something called the two truths, which I really like. And if you have those, you can say, yes, it's real, but it's also not real. And I really think that's a very good way of saying it. Because, of course, we have to accept in some way that there's dualism, and we have to accept that you are different from me, and that my body is different from my mind, and whatever. But in some sense, you are also not different from me, even though you are American and I'm Danish and whatnot. So yes, we are different, and no, we are not different. And yes, mind and body are separated, and no, mind and body are not separated. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense to me. I'm. It requires imagination. It requires a level of going outside of your here we go with a little bit of a duality though. Like have to go outside of my body to imagine a larger whole than myself that incorporates you and me in that larger whole. Right.
Say that.
That's the way I can fathom that.
Mm.
So it's imagining a larger whole that we're both a part of.
Yeah, in a way. In a way, I think also, I mean, when I first came upon this idea of two truths and that things can both be this and that at the same time, I had a lot of resistance to it. And I think it's because I'm brought up in a Western context where we are told to look for what is objectively true. And it's again back to Descartes, that we want something like, is it 1 or 0?
Right.
And I think maybe in an Eastern context, you are more used to talking about truth in the context of what we are talking about. Like, yes, in some situations, this may be the right thing to do. In some situations, this other thing may be the right thing to do. But as Westerners, like brought up scientifically, we want to know, like, is it that one? My Aikido teacher used to say, your problem as Westerners is that you are brought up with one God, where we have many gods in Asia. And I think maybe this is it. Like we have this idea of one book and one truth and one whatever. But
Well,
if you have
not to go off on a whole nother tangent, but that's why
mm,
I like to go back to the Neoplatonists,
mm,
because that's a Western stream of thought that
mm,
is not necessarily monotheistic, that has room for perspectives of being that are not necessarily so uh, narrow, right? And like if you go back far enough, the ancient Greeks and Romans were animistic in a sense. You know, the the differentiation between the Eastern and Western philosophies aren't so differentiated. I don't know what
mm,
happened in history that created the Western mind that we talk about when people talk about the divide between the East and West. But I
mm,
feel like if you go back just far enough in the West, there's not really much of a difference. That's what I'm
mm.
trying to that's what I was trying to do in my last episode
Okay.
was, and I know there's danger with equating, like you can't equate this culture with that culture because it's I don't whatever. But
Mm.
I'm trying to find similarities between East and West. And
Yeah.
I have an advantage in a way because the way my father raised me was anti I don't want to say anti-scientific, but
Mm,
I wasn't really raised thinking that the scientific rational mind was the pinnacle. I was It was kind of just, you know, my father um exposed me to like the the I Ching and Tao, you know,
mm,
so I grew up with a more animistic mindset, worldview
mm,
than and so
mm,
but going back to the duality, so do you think that the practice of Aikido in the way of like having an uke and a nage,
mm.
is that like a physical practice of erasing the duality by trying to by like fusing the two uke and nage into one technique?
Mm. Well, I think the so because my other sort of practice is the practice of yoga, I often compare yoga and Aikido because people from different camps ask me like, "What's the other one like?" And I often say to people, "Yeah, yoga is really nice because you get into this room and you go on the yoga mat and you really have a good couple of hours. But the problem is that once you come out, everybody else is still there and they haven't done yoga, so they're still assholes like they were before you went in. Whereas in the practice of Aikido, you almost always do Aikido with a partner. And in that sense, Aikido demands something of you that yoga doesn't demand of you. So Aikido demands of you the ability to relate to other people. Where I think most people do yoga in order not to have to relate to anybody for at least an hour and a half, right? Just nice music and
Right, right.
incense. No, I really like yoga. It sounds like I don't. But so I think that and that's also, of course, karate and other martial arts, you often practice with a partner, but like in karate, you can practice on this makawai, this thing that you can hit, or in boxing, you can practice on a bag, or judo, they have this big thing that looks like a human being that you can throw it around and stuff like that.
Mm.
And I really never saw any good tools for practicing Aikido because you need another living, reacting human being in order to do it. At least I feel that you do. Um, and I think that teaches you something valuable about you need to be present, or you need to have intention, and you need to practice with somebody who's present and who has intention. And maybe having intention is the first step to break the barrier between you and the world. I mean, if I just look at stuff like just objects in the world, they can seem very alien, but as soon as it's something that I have attention towards, like, oh, that's my cup, and this is my computer, and this is this, and I want this with this, I start interacting with these things, and they are no longer just like dead objects, but they actually become, you could say, almost extensions of me, whether it's the racket for tennis or the bouquin for Aikido or the coffee cup or whatever. If it's really good, it's like you expand yourself and you sort of absorb the cup or the racket or the bouquin or maybe even the other person by way of having intention or by way of wanting to relate to the world. And in that way, I think Aikido is a very unique practice. Also, maybe compared to some other martial arts that are maybe sort of about combating the outer world instead of really wanting to relate to it like things that you enjoy, like your cup and your racket or whatever. So yeah, I think that practice is about, it breaks down this idea of duality, both your internal duality, your internal mind-body duality, and the duality of me versus the other person. I really think.
Yeah, I mean, it's really genius if that was the original intention of it, right? Because I it seems like that's exactly what it does, what you just said. Is it immerses you back into the flow of life. And
Yeah.
it's through this partner practice,
Mhm.
and especially because you're not competing against each other
Mhm.
necessarily.
Yeah, yeah,
Necessarily, I mean, of course, we're human beings, so that it gets to be contentious sometimes. You have a partner who's like, you have to take better ukemi, or like,
yeah.
there's like an issue with how hard you're attacking or how hard you're
Yeah.
not attacking, or there's all these issues that come up. But
Mm.
when it's going well, there's this like amazing symbiosis, or maybe
Yeah.
not symbiosis, but a sync,
Yeah.
synchronized movement.
Yeah.
And if you're practicing with someone at your same speed and level,
Mm.
it can be really dynamic and really
Mhm.
intense, but you're not defeating each other in
No.
any way. You're both growing from the
Mm.
experience, right? And I'm like, it's like really genius if that was the intention of it. And trying to read through the history of how it was founded, and
Mm.
it's hard to tell if that was the original intention, but it's at least from the way we're talking about it now, it's at least evolved to be
Mm.
that kind of practice.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea about the original intention, I mean, I think I'd never met him, but I think Morishima probably was a very strange guy. And as far as I've read in these old Stanley Pranin interviews, even his students at the time had a hard time understanding what his intention was and would sometimes just nod and say yes in order to get him to stop talking. I mean, so who knows what his intention was? But I think it's okay for Aikido, like anything else, to develop. So in a sense, maybe the original intention of Nikyo was to break somebody's wrist really badly, but I don't have so much use for that in my life. So if I have to practice Nikyo in a sensible way, I have to find something else to use it for. And I like to use it for what we are talking about here. And I think nobody could have anything against that. I mean, nobody has a patent on Nikyu, luckily, so I can use it however I like. And if my students start fighting in a way like you talk about, I will take that up, and I would say, oh, I think in this dojo it should really be about fighting less, because I have enough fighting in my normal life. I have 3 kids and a wife. If I want to fight, I just stay at home. So can we please make this practice about not fighting? And then probably that attracts people who are interested in not fighting, and we will practice Nikyo in a way that doesn't break anybody's, I mean, as well as we can, break anybody's wrist. And whatever Morihei Ueshiba thought about it, or Koichi Tohei for that matter, I mean, I don't know, it's interesting historically, but this reverence of the old masters, I don't know if it's maybe a little bit over-exaggerated sometimes. I don't know.
Well, yeah, sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it's cool to think, from my standpoint, like to think I'm studying something that was from like an ancient master passed down through the generations. It's like
Mm,
you get into the mythology of it, but that's
yeah.
only sometimes. Sometimes I'm more
Mm,
like practical about it and
mhm.
thinking like this exercise exists here and now, and every day it's different and every day it's growing.
Mm.
So but I'm interested. Okay, now let's get to ki, right? So
Let's
in
get to key.
your dojo,
Yeah.
when you're talking about ki,
Mm.
how do you talk about it? What do you imagine it as, like an actual substance that permeates time and space that you can kind of tap into and manipulate, or like or join with, or is it more psychological? I'm just curious.
Hmm. Yeah, so the maybe I could say what you're asking really is it physical or is it mental? And we're back in the Cartesian again, right? So is it a physical thing like a object, or is it just in your mind? Is it mind or is it body? And I would really like to say that if you like key can sort of blow the framework of these things, in that it is neither physical nor mental, or it's both physical or mental, if
Well,
you like.
you cut out for 1 second. Can you just go back
Okay.
like a couple seconds?
Yes. So sometimes people ask, is key physical or is key mental? And when they do that, it's obvious that they are in still the Cartesian paradigm in a way, because they are still subconsciously or consciously dividing the world into these two kinds of things. And I think we can answer in that paradigm, or we can try to go beyond it and say, when you talk about ki, you really break the barrier between the physical and the mental. And I think some of the like I said, I practice in the ki aikido tradition, and we have these key exercises. Do you know about this?
Yes,
From
I do.
Koichi Toi?
I've never trained. I've never trained at a Tohei dojo, but
Hmm.
I have read a lot about it, and
Okay.
I've practiced with people who used to be in the Ki Society and left.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah. So I think when these exercises are used properly, I mean, if you see these old Tohei videos, it's a little bit not so much key exercises, but rather demonstrations of, oh, I can be so strong sometimes. But if they're used properly, they help to show you how much your mind uh, influences the physicality of your body, and that your body is always in a way that is conditioned by your mind, if we want to talk in this dualistic way. So I have given a lot of lectures to people about being present and meditation stuff and all that. And oftentimes I'm so happy that I can ask people after my lecture to stand up and do some physical key exercises, because you can say to people, yeah, it's really good to be relaxed and strong at the same time, and nobody can disagree with that. But if you can also show people how can you be relaxed and strong at the same time, that can really change something fundamental in people. And I think this is what the key exercises can do. They can point to this coordination of the mind and the body. And I think that is what That is how ki is useful to talk about. It's like if you talk about the waves of the water. So the wave in the water is the water that is coordinating itself in a particular way. So you can't really say that the wave is physical, but you can't also really say that the wave is not physical. But of course, if you see a wave and then you put it in a glass and you run home and you say, I have a wave in my glass, of course you don't, you just have some water. So is a wave physical or non-physical? It's a very hard question to answer because it is both. And I think it's the same with ki. Ki is something very physical, but it's also not. Like intention, for example, is also intention is something physical. If I didn't have a physical body, probably I couldn't have intention. But intention is also something that goes beyond the physical body. So it's non-physical but non-supernatural as well. And that's how I talk about ki, as something non-physical but non-supernatural. And then I can give people demonstrations of what does that mean. First, I can do the ki exercises because they're very easy and there's no resistance or combat. And then we can move on to the Aikido exercises done with this ki understanding. And you can see, oh, even if somebody is pushing me a little bit, I can still maintain this this awareness that I learned because I'm now learning the concept of ki. Does that answer anything that you asked?
Can I just ask you for a quick clarification? You said
Yes.
it's non-physical, but it's not supernatural, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So is that just to say that it's still existing within nature and not something that's non-natural? Or do you mean that it's not spiritual? Are you making a designation?
Oh, these are big
Yeah, I
concepts
know.
we're talking
I
about.
don't know.
Yeah.
This is, I
So
don't.
often when people, like, again, I come in the yoga world and people talk about a lot about prana and chakras and all that stuff. And I often feel when people talk about these mysterious energies, it's like they talk about them in a very physical way, actually, almost like batteries and cords and wires and stuff like that. But then they just say, like, it's invisible or it's not on the physical level. Then you can say something, people can say, like, oh, your throat chakra is in your throat, but not on the physical level. Where I always ask myself, how can something be somewhere, but it's not on the physical level? Because, like, these coordinates in space and time, that's physical. So I think most supernatural things are based on a confusion in language. It's like we could
Well,
have a long
I'm not saying
Hmm?
that you need to answer this question, but it
Yeah.
just came up in my mind.
Oh yeah.
Can something be somewhere but without having a body? Like, are there beings that exist that don't have bodies? Like what they would call like non-corporeal beings. I know we're
Yeah,
going
yeah.
back to like.
No, but because this is exactly a circular. This is a tautology. This is a circular argument because somewhere implies physicality. So it's like, can something have a color without emitting light? No, it cannot, because that is the very definition of color, is that there's something emitted or something like that, right?
Well,
But people,
if I'm sorry, if it's
yeah,
just say there's just let's just say a ghost floating in
yes,
the air. It's
hmm
floating in the air. It doesn't have a body,
hmm
but the air where it would be
hmm
would constitute its body, right? Like there would be like an organized intelligence
hmm
within the body of the air.
hmm
Do you know what I mean? Like the air could be its body. It doesn't have its own body. It's like an organized non-corporeal being. Well, I guess it does have a body. If never mind.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just trying to,
it's
because I
yeah,
mean
but
this goes back to like Platonism and like old arguments between the atomists and like.
yeah, Heraclitus and stuff. But I think this is a lot of the confusion in when we talk about things like ki, is that we can have what seems like meaningful conversations for a long time. Like I could say to you, I have a s- I have a circular square, And we could talk for a long time about this circular square that I have. But of course, something cannot be both a circle and a square. That's just meaningless in language. But we could talk about, yeah, I have a blue circular square and you have a red circular square. But if we really inquire into these concepts, we can see, oh, it doesn't make sense. And the same thing with a lot of the ways that ki is being talked about, like this, it's non-physical, but it exists somewhere or whatever. It's very often a little bit like nonsense talk, I think. And a lot of supernatural, and I've been in the supernatural yoga environment for 20 years, 20 plus years, and a lot of what is being talked about with chakras and chi and ki and prana and
Mhm.
really is meaningless if you really dig down into it. But if you do, because you're a philosopher, you can become a little bit unpopular sometimes. but it really is. I mean, talking about things that exist in a physical place but are not physical, it doesn't make sense. We have many things that are not physical, like love. Love is not physical, but it also means that it exists. If you've ever loved somebody, you know it exists, but it's not anywhere. So you can't say 1 kilo of love, for example. You can't say that. Or 1 hertz or megahertz or kilobyte or whatever. You can't quantify it in the physical sense. And some people want to quantify things like prana or chi because they talk about energy, and energy, then we think about electricity, and that's quantifiable, and then we think it's probably the same. And then this metaphor sort of devolves, and we think, oh, I have a battery, it's full of ki, it has 1 amp, 3 volts, or something like that. And I think it's that then I think becomes a meaningless conversation. So I think ki is real in the same sense that love is real and intention is real and a bad mood is real, and those things are all real, but they are not physical. If that makes sense. But it's important to talk about it. If I say to you, are you in a bad mood? I mean, that's very important. Maybe more important than how many kilos you weigh. So there's a lot of non-physical things that are very important to us and that exist but don't exist anywhere. And I think with ki, it's the same.
I agree with you. I'm just doing my job as like
Mm-hmm.
as a host, trying to
Yeah.
probe a little deeper. So
And well,
and
then
and I'm
I can say more stuff about this. I mean, if you look at the way the word ki is used, or in the Japanese language, it means a lot of things. So of course, if you say ki doesn't exist, it's like, okay, well then Japanese people have to stop speaking because they speak about it all the time. So saying that it doesn't exist, that's completely meaningless, of course, because it exists in the way they speak. But if you want it to exist the same way as tables and chairs exist, then probably you're right.
I had a very very long argument on Facebook about key, like, and I used I use the same example of love as something that's real,
Yeah.
but not tangible, but not
Mm.
not physically measurable.
Mm.
So I agree with you on all of those terms. I just wanted to push back a little bit about the supernatural because
Okay.
the 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 qualification that something can't be somewhere and not physical at the same time. Because
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to like the origins of Greek philosophy with Thales. You know Thales. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but
Yeah.
Thales.
Yes.
He said all things are full of gods, right? And in the Shinto religion,
Mm-hmm.
it was originally like a just a worship of kami, Kami,
Yes.
and they believed that there was kami in everything. There's gods in everything. So
Yes.
it's similar. The Thales
Yes.
quote, "All things are full of gods," and
Yes.
the
Yes.
view of the Shinto religion of everything is full of gods. So that
Yes.
concept, it's a little bit separate from ki, yet somehow in
Mm-mm.
Aikido, O
Yeah.
Sensei kind of brought it all together because he
Mm-hmm.
was influenced just as much by the idea of kami
Mm-hmm.
as he was by the idea of ki.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. And
So
I. Mm?
no. So go ahead.
Yeah. No.
I'll
Going
just
back to what we talked about earlier, I think this is a really important point because we started our conversation talking about Descartes, and and what Descartes did with this cut of the physical and the mental is also he took the kami out of the physical. So if you look at physics, for example, the Aristotelian physics, his idea is that something falls to the ground because it has its natural place somewhere. That's why iron is heavier than something that's lighter than iron.
Right, and
Uh,
because the ground is the center,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the
But there's this idea that things have what is called a cosmology, right? Things have a natural order. So there's cosmos rather than chaos. So before Descartes, you could say that nature had spirit in it because nature wanted something. But after Descartes, it's a little bit separated. Like Descartes, for example, he did terrible things to animals because he
I know
said,
I was gonna bring that up. He
yeah, yeah.
cut
When an animal makes a
dogs open
sound,
while they were
it's
alive.
just like when you play an organ, the organ makes a sound. It's not because the
Right.
organ has any feelings, it's just that's how organs work when you play them. So his idea was that the only things that had intention were souls, and so it was human beings, and everything else had no soul. And I think it has taken us a long time to rediscover that animals actually give, like they don't like to be hurt. And now recently, there's been a lot of research on plants, how trees have intelligence and plants have intelligence, and fungi maybe has intelligence, or so we are slowly rediscovering that there's a lot of intention in nature. Nature wants something. Not that it sits at home and ponders it philosophically, but nature has kami, you could say. But 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 Descartes took that away. He said the only thing that has a spirit is a human being, and everything else is just dead, like Lego bricks that are
Yeah.
hitting each other.
I really often wonder how Descartes had so much influence on people. Like, why him? Was it just because he gave like sociopaths a cosmology to live by? Like, I just wonder what made his thought so powerful. I feel like
Mm.
it just gave people. Maybe it just gave people the like impetus and the permission to just monopolize nature, to just take it all. Like it was just opening up the floodgates to like give human beings the permission to kind of just run wild. I don't know. I gotta
Yep.
wonder why Descartes had so much influence.
But I think also because his ideas opened, I mean, he basically founded modern science, right? And modern science gave us all kinds of commodities and comfortable, solutions to all kinds of stuff, and modern medicine and da. So by just manipulating nature and using nature as a resource, life can be really nice as a human being. So in a way, I
Right.
understand
But
why.
first you have to imagine that nature has no feelings of its own, right? First you
Yeah,
have to
yeah. But then
right.
when he said that, and then we started exploring nature, it was like, oh, this is going great. I mean, now we realize that, maybe we fucked up something along the way,
Right.
but yeah, I think he really laid the foundation for, and also for a lot of good stuff. I mean, when I go to the hospital, I feel so lucky that Descartes, made it so that doctors could cut into the body and look that there's an appendix and stuff like that. So of course he did a lot of good stuff, and made research possible in a way. Um, and then, we lost the soul of nature kind of along the way as well. And yeah, that was just the price we had to pay. But maybe we can start moving in the other direction, and maybe Aikido is one thing that sort of moves us in the other direction. And this talk about ki and kami.
Yeah, well, definitely it came up in that um in Japan at that time. It got caught up in a flux of this return to ancient. O Sensei was influenced very much by like new religions of his time that were going
Yeah,
kind of back to like indigenous ways of thinking, you know.
yeah, like the Yomoto Kyo you're thinking about.
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
So there's definitely something in us that longs to belong to nature as opposed to just being its exploiter, I
Mhm.
think, you know. but again, it goes back like, is Aikido really this genius invention where like that was part of the plan? Because it does it's in O Sensei's own words. I'm paraphrasing, but like it is designed to put you back into the universe, to be back at part of the universe, not not separate from the universe, not separate from the cosmos, but a part of it. So it's it's it is a practice of that.
Mm.
So that's good. At
Mm.
least we got that. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, but if we can, I mean, I read an article by a Frenchman whose name I do not remember at the moment, but he lives in Japan and is a practitioner of Aikido. And he says, yes, you think Aikido is about harmony, but in order to really understand that, you have to understand the concept of harmony that Mori Ueshiba was using in the time that he was using it, and so on and so forth. And the point of his article basically was that don't think that your concept of harmony as a 21st century modern human being is the same as Mori Ueshiba's concept of harmony. And even if that might be true, I think if Aikido can serve a modern day 21st century human being to create the concept of harmony that they think is important, then it's okay. And I don't need to justify my concept of harmony somehow historically in Mori Ueshiba's practice of Aikido. I see the same thing again coming from yoga. There has been a lot of research done on yoga in recent years by people uncovering sort of the historical roots of yoga, and what's coming out is that yoga is not at all as old as we think it is. And a lot of the yoga practices that we are doing now are actually modern inventions from maybe the early 20th century. And for some people, this was a catastrophe, especially for people in India, because yoga is a big export in India and it's a part of the cultural heritage. But for a lot of people, it didn't really matter. It's like, it's not about this thing being ancient. It's about this thing working for me in my daily life. But in some practices, we have this idea of romanticizing the old days in some way, like Aikido or yoga maybe. It's like, if it's really old, it's probably really nice or really good. Whereas I often think, if I want to go to the hospital and then they say, oh, we want to offer you this treatment, it's more than 5,000 years old. I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want the modern laser surgery treatment, not the old flint rock in your eye treatment. But with some things, we have this idea of a little bit romanticizing the ancient past. And I don't know how I feel about that.
For me, it depends on my mood. You know, it's sometimes I'm all gung ho about that, and sometimes I'm completely modern in my thinking. Sometimes I'm not. But that brings me back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago about the article you read by the French guy practicing
Mm.
Aikido in Japan, who brought up that the modern person's definition of the word harmony shouldn't be equated with O Sensei's definition of the word harmony. But
Mm.
to me, my own definition of harmony changes every day.
Mm.
So, of course, and I'm sure O Sensei's definition of the word harmony changed every day. Like
Mm.
that's taking out of the equation that human beings are malleable, imperfect
Mm.
beings, right? That if sometimes we need to have these terminology as like guideposts in our lives,
Mm.
and we
Mhm.
use them for a certain amount of time, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, just to there's like if you find an ancient quote and you like it and
Yeah.
it's useful in your life to
Yeah.
get you through the day,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't find anything wrong with that.
No,
You
no,
know,
it's true. It's true. I think
sometimes
there's,
people take shit too seriously. You know, they're like, "Oh,
yeah.
sensei didn't mean this." Like, okay, you don't know, I don't know, nobody
Mm.
knows, right?
No, no. But then I also think that that's what's wonderful about what we do, is that it's actually a physical practice. So in a way, you and I can sit here and we can talk about harmony for hours. But what really would be nice, which probably is not going to happen, is if we could practice some Aikido together.
Right,
Because
exactly, yeah.
because in that way, if you could just fly over here and we could roll around for a couple of hours, I would really feel that we could communicate, or we could get a lot deeper communication going than what we're doing here. And probably after a couple of hours of Aikido, if we went back to talk about harmony again, we would have like a common reference. And I would think, oh, this guy, he's a much more hard guy than I thought he was talking on the computer. He seems so nice. Or maybe it would be the other way around.
No, it's
So,
probably the opposite. It's the
so,
opposite.
so and that really, I think, is the wonderful thing about the Aikido practice, that yes, you can say whatever you like about harmony. And probably if you say something that's broad enough, I'm going to agree with it. But when we get on the mat and start to practice, oh, I get surprised sometimes. Some really nice people I know, they break my wrists when we practice, and I'm really surprised by that. And then there are some people that are really tough, but when you practice with them, they are just the most gentle and soft people. And that's such a wonderful thing about this thing that we do, that it's tangible in a sense that just this big head philosophy maybe is not. My late Aikido teacher, his definition of ki was ki is something that is not clear, and he was always using the sign of the ki, the calligraphy ki, is this rice that's cooking, and the steam that's coming up. And he would say, oh, this steam, that's because steam, the definition of steam is that it's something not clear. That's how steam is. It's not that it's because you're just looking at it from the wrong angle. Steam is, per definition, unclear, and that's what it is. And that was also his definition of ki. And in that sense, of course, it cannot be put into language, because the definition of language is that it's something clear. That's what I was fighting with at university. But if we had an Aikido practice, we would both have an experience of something, and it would maybe be hard to put into words because it was per definition unclear, but the sensation maybe would be clear in a way, like it would be very real sensation at least. So maybe we also need to go on that level when talking about ki, that accepting ki also makes us accept that we can relate in a ways that are beyond language and beyond something clear. Like love, when you love somebody, when my wife asks me, why do you love me? It's like, that takes the love out of it somehow.
Yeah, that's like that's the worst question, right?
Yeah, it is.
Because as soon as you start giving answers, it starts to feel kind of like transactional.
Yeah, and then I say,
Or
because you're so pretty, and then she says, but if I
right,
wasn't pretty, you'd still love me,
right,
right? And you get into all these arguments.
right.
So love, you have to leave love unclear somehow to appreciate it. I mean, of course, you have to make a clear framework where it can live. It's good to have a house and a garden and whatever, but the love itself is somehow unclear. And maybe it's the same with ki. You can have a clear framework for ki to move inside, but it is per definition unclear, but still very real, like intention, I think.
Yeah. And speaking of love, did you know that another meaning of I in Japanese is love?
Mm. Yeah.
There's I had a really I was really lucky to be in Uchideshi for a period of time at
Okay.
New York Aikikai,
Mm.
and there was a sensei there named Sugano Sensei, and
Mm-hmm.
he was one of the Uchideshi from O Sensei that traveled, around the world, kind of in the 60s,
Okay.
and he was in Australia for a time, then Belgium, then came to New York,
Mm.
and there was before his classes, he would kind of sit out in the hallway, and if we were lucky, like he would just start talking and tell us stories,
Mm.
and he told, and I don't want to botch it. I'm paraphrasing. It was like 15 years ago. I don't remember word for word what he said,
Mm.
but he was trying to explain that the term Aiki had already existed in Japanese martial arts before. There was
Mm.
a term Aiki together, not separate Aiki, right? but separate together. And
Yes.
I'm sure a lot of people listening to this know that. I didn't really know that back then,
Mhm.
and only now I'm starting to like do a lot more research into the history of Aikido, and I'm trying to understand what the difference is between the term Aiki and then the separate terms Aiki. There is a difference in meaning. But what O Sensei did, according to Sugano Sensei, and it was a play on words, was that the I did mean love. Like he was using the I as love.
Hmm.
And it wasn't just harmony, it was love.
Okay.
And I wish I would have like wrote it down or recorded it but I remember hearing it. I was there when Sugano Sensei said this. I just wanted to tie that back into love.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
your dojo is in Copenhagen?
No, my dojo is not. My dojo is in, I'm in Denmark, which maybe I should mention. And the second largest city in Denmark is called Aarhus, which is where I live. So that's where my dojo is.
I just watched a series. I don't that took place in half Denmark, half Norway. It was called The Bridge. Is that
Yeah, it's Sweden. It's Denmark and Sweden
it's
because
Denmark and Sweden?
because we are connected with a bridge. Yeah,
Right, right,
it was a big thing back here. There's a murder takes place right in the middle of the
right. The
bridge.
murder
Yeah,
takes place on the bridge.
yeah,
They
yeah, yeah.
right.
Yeah, it's very good.
It's pretty deep.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a crazy series. It is really a crazy series.
And
Mhm.
so you're teaching regularly Aikido?
Yes, I am. I mean, I co-run a dojo with a good friend, and I have classes there every week. And then recently, I've started teaching internationally as well. So I was in Germany last month, and I'm going to Sweden next month, and then I'm going to Poland as well a little bit later. And then I organize the European summer camp for Aikido, which takes place here in Denmark.
Oh wow.
Uh, we lost so Aikido in Denmark or Aikido in Europe was run by Kenjiro Yoshikasagi Sensei, who came to Europe with the Toei Sensei back in the 70s, and he just, as a young man, he just stayed here. And he was teaching until 2021, where he passed away. And since then, his branch of Aikido, he separated from the Japanese Kino Kenkukai back in 2001 when Toei Sensei retired. So he has run his own organization in Europe for basically 20 years. And when he passed away, we all scrambled to find out, like, what are we gonna do?
Hmm.
And things are slowly starting to condensate. And one of the things is the summer camp, which takes place in Denmark every year, which I organize together with my dojo. I
Well,
don't
I'll put a
teach.
link to
We
that
have teachers.
if you send me a
Oh yeah,
link.
yeah,
If you send me a link to that, I'll
yeah,
put it in my show notes or
yeah, yeah. For sure, I will send you that. For sure, I will send you that. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much more to explore about this concept of ki. One thing we didn't really get to explore, if I could just say one last thing, is what it reminded me of with your teacher saying that I is love, is that just as much as we have trouble in the West translating the Eastern concepts, I think the same trouble goes the other way around. Like I was reading some yoga texts, interviews with yoga masters from the early 70s or something, and they talk a lot about this prana. Is it the same as energy? And they're asking these yoga masters about it, and it's obvious that these yoga masters, they are yoga masters, but they know nothing about the Western concept of energy. So they are kind of ignorant from their standpoint, and they just say, yes, it's the same as energy, without
hmm
really knowing what energy is. And the Westerners are like, oh, it's like energy, without really knowing what that is. So this gap of translation is really it's like a two-way gap of translation in a way. And of course, there's connection. I mean, some people think that we didn't meet the Orient until the Beatles went to India in the 60s or something. But like you
Right.
said, if we go back in history, like Alexander the Great traveled to India. Like he was a Macedonian student of Aristotle. He traveled to India in 300 something BC. So of course there's always been communication with the East, but still it's a little bit like it's not easy. What I was saying there is that some people seem to believe that um, that the connection between East and West is a relatively recent invention, and that it happened with the Beatles practicing transcendental meditation in the 70s. But really, there has always been this connection, and like there's documentation of Alexander the Great. He met yogis around the year 300. He refers to them as the gymnosophers. So
Right. Yeah.
a connection between gymnos, which is naked, and philosophers, which is somebody who knows about wisdom.
And
So
Plotinus talked about wanting to go to India. There
mhm.
was and there was Greek Buddhists. I forgot what they're
Yes,
called, but
yes,
there's
there were. No, it's true. The Ashok, one of the great Buddhist kings, he expanded
Ashoka, right.
the northern Buddhist empire all the way. I mean, all the way almost to Greece. So there is. I mean, even though we say it's difficult to translate Oriental concepts into Western concepts, I mean, there is a fundamental connection, I think, between the two cultures somehow. And it's again back to what we talked about earlier. Is it the same or is it different? Well, it's both. It's both the same and, and different. It depends. It depends on your perspective and what you're interested in. But of course,
and
often if you,
I'm
hmm?
sorry, but by dividing the world into East and West, it kind of presupposes that everybody in the East thinks one way, everybody in the West
Mm,
thinks one way.
yeah,
And
yeah,
like there's people who live in the same building as me who have a
mm,
different definition of the word energy. Like you were talking before
yeah,
about,
yeah, for sure.
you know what I mean? Like we, you can live in the same house as somebody, and
Mm,
when you're using one word, you have different definitions
yeah,
and understandings of that word. So that's just inherent in human beings.
yeah. Of course. I mean, these days, um, you know, you can probably have more nationalities living in your building that some people 200 years would meet in their whole life.
Oh yeah, especially
So
in New York. I live in New York, so
yeah, I could
it's
imagine that. But everywhere, I think it's like this slowly that
Mhm.
there's people from all over. I mean, in Denmark also, there's a lot of people from many different cultures coming to visit. And then again, it's the question if you are seeing differences or similarities, right? Which is pretty much your own choice. Hmm?
I guess yeah, that's pretty deep, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're the kind of person that sees differences more than similarities, then that's
Yeah,
just the way
yeah,
you think.
yeah. Yeah, but I guess no, I don't want to get into this. Yes, this is true. This is true.
I don't mind.
Mm.
It's it's good to talk to a philosopher. I mean, I talk to I think I'm philosophical sometimes, but
Mm.
to talk to an actual and I read a lot of books on philosophy,
Mm.
but to talk to someone who's an actual philosopher is helpful.
That's good. We can talk about other Aikido topics at a later time if you like.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, to me, all the topics just kind of bleed in together. Like it's just interesting to me to talk to people who also practice Aikido,
mhm.
right? It's talking about Aikido is difficult because, like you said, it's better to just practice Aikido, right? Talking about it makes it into like a subject that's like, you know, you could talk about it forever, but like you said, practicing it
Yeah,
is
to me, I think it's a little bit
essential.
both. It's like if you go to a wine tasting, I mean, you can drink wine your whole life without really getting to appreciate wine. And you can talk about wine your whole life without appreciating wine. But if you go to a wine tasting and you both get to taste some wine, and there's some smart guy talking about, how it tastes like this and that, then probably that's where you get the most appreciation of wine. And I think with Aikido, for me, maybe it's the same, that on the one hand, it wouldn't be the same without the practice. But on the other hand, I think talking about it like we do, I think also brings a lot of nuances to the practice as well.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's the
Mm.
purpose of
Yeah,
that's what I'm
exactly.
trying to do. So
Yeah,
hopefully.
exactly. Exactly. Mm.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to have a
I'll put links
conversation.
in the Substack. Yeah, it
Perfect.
was definitely.